Welcome to my channel, The Magic of Java. This is my third book called The Londo and the Green Queen's Revenge. It's a novel. It's a novel about me coming to terms with the attempted destruction of an Englishman and his Javanese family. But it is a novel. Yes, it's based on experience. It's based on real people and celebrities, but amalgams of real people or caricatures of them. So if you do identify yourself, please forgive me, because it's only intended as a yarn. Treachery from the past. I've been typing my experiences and thoughts now for some 20 months and really should have learnt more, or at least taken heed of my thoughts regarding the synchronicity of my writing. Branwell contacted me asking for money as a temporary measure before he moved into the flat I had agreed to pay for. He told me that he'd attempted suicide once more and was being discharged from hospital the next day. I now wonder if mine and Maddie's dreams of a few days ago were actually us picking up on Branwell's anguish and not my mother's. But most likely we're all affected by my mother, including Branwell, and then this has a secondary impact on us. It was already bedtime in Gun and Keedle, and Branwell wanted me to download the Airbnb app and book somewhere for him, as without a credit card nor ID, this was impossible for him to do, even if he had the money. Over 3 hours later, I'd booked a flat for him, less than a mile from his mother's, and the home we'd lived in, and even closer to Manchester Grammar School, which he attended, and with its tenuous connection to Sir John Dee. Later he told me that the flat he visited was not suitable, not the Airbnb, which was fine. I do hope this isn't another attempt to get me to pay for short-term accommodation over the long term. Maybe I shouldn't have written that either. 15 years ago, I would get out of bed to work on some emergency connected to my business and the creation of value. Now it is to inadequately fill the gaps left by a grossly underfunded and devious mental health service with my savings, which if I am not more careful, will ultimately lead to my own destitution. I should also add a mental health trust who no longer responds to my emails, and I am left with the distinct impression that Branwell and maybe I am being manipulated by him. This really is a microcosm of not only my downturn in fortunes, but how the world's economy has gone from productivity and wealth generation to a massive redistribution of wealth from the poor to the rich. I needed to pray, as I really don't know what I can do for Branwell, and fearful that he will drag me and my Indonesian family into destitution. To a degree my prayer worked. I realised that Branwell had inherited much from his mother, including how he argues with me. There is simply no point in challenging him over anything, because he will change the argument to insult and abuse me, always with comments that he knows are the most destructive, however trivial the original issue. With his mother, such arguments resulted in us not speaking to each other at all for months, as communication was just too painful. Whilst I have not concluded that Branwell is a secondary psychopath, he certainly exhibits the behaviour of a closet narcissist. An alternative and more persuasive explanation is that, like all around us, he is simply jealous of me. Branwell believes that I have the confidence and ability in business he lacks. He cannot see that these are issues I worked on at his age, not things that came naturally to me. But I saw so little of him as a child, being brought up by his mother, and he is now bitter, so bitter, and I am unable to counsel or explain anything to him. I need to realise this about my son, that as an INFJ, I can never have a relationship I wanted with him, but maybe I can ensure that he lives. This must be exactly what he has done to all around him, including my friend Patrick. So Branwell is alone and frightened, with nobody willing to help him anymore. My solution to my partner's unrestricted spending was to earn more money, although this meant I was criticised for being away from the home, always working. Fortunately, I do not have this option with Branwell. Davina called me from California. She seemed to be coping well, but is all too aware of the temporary nature of her situation. Not least, she is being prosecuted for her inability to pay health insurance in a country she really doesn't want to be in. Martin, however, is less adaptable and has thrown himself into tying up the deal which has eluded him for 10 years and I believe to be fraudulent. Martin wants me to find out the price of constructing a luxury hotel and hospital in Georgia. But I've already done some initial work, and luxury hotels are so oversupplied in Georgia that there is a moratorium on building them. Whilst Georgia already has a luxury hospital, which given its lack of a private sector middle class, I must assume is enough. Georgia has plenty of good cheap hospitals with good doctors, ideally suited to the university lecturers and public sector managers who make up its middle class. So where would the customers come from? Georgia Airport is already well over capacity, so there is no possibility of flying tourists, either regular or medical tourists, until the new airport is built. This also provided me with an opportunity to register how let down I felt in my loan being linked to them receiving money from this fraudster. Davina understood and also seems to respect that I'd held back in shattering Martin's hopes, as this deal coming off is really the only plan he has for them to be reunited. That evening I finally got a response to my emails from Branwell's social worker. She was annoyed that I had agreed to pay for Branwell's flat, as she wanted to get him into sheltered accommodation. This came as a complete shock to me, not least as I agreed this was his best option, and I might have been able to persuade Branwell to take it. Certainly I would have tried. True, Branwell had mentioned a long time ago his mother and team had mentioned sheltered accommodation, but I was unaware of their plans. So Branwell and I are being manipulated. Shocking though these impacts are, it is to stress and the loss of sleep I have endured for some 18 months, and this probably had a more devastating effect on me and also presumably on Branwell. But of course, we're dealing with an NHS trust in a large northern city, a city where telling the truth to the electorate and service users is a complete anathema, especially when there are so many cunning half-truths they can devise. A city in which the provision of public services appears to be more influenced by the North American alt-right than the universalist principles of the welfare state. Maybe I'd played a minor role in the abandonment of the Webbs and the Clarion Cycle Club by municipal socialism, as when a student I would allow Fenner to barge past me and drag my flatmate out of bed to sell copies of Living Marxism on the streets of Cardiff. Indeed, it was a city council in this northern city who were party to wrecking my career as an academic years previously. I suspect the process began when it was realised that so much in our news is untrue, then spotting how PR, or propaganda as it was called prior to Edward L. Bernay's rebranding, had supplanted the truth within central government. It trickles down to local government and finally to fairly low-level employees of government agencies. Eventually, public servants search for the best sound bites rather than the most truthful, even when at the time the truth may be more palatable. It would appear that that Branwell is like me. He spots when he's being manipulated and reacts in exactly the opposite way that he's supposed to. Neither of us are being bloody-minded when we do this, but if we spot an illogical proposition, we become confused and react to the direction of pressure. Surely the last thing a mental health trust should do with an intelligent paranoid schizophrenic is to collude to force them to do something they don't want to do. Although I don't normally compound the manipulation by manipulating others as Branwell has with me. Of course, I also cannot rule out that the social worker is being manipulated by his mother in an attempt to bankrupt me. But most likely Branwell is doing it all by himself, too frightened to accept sheltered accommodation. "But I don't want to go amongst mad people," Alice remarked. "Oh, you can't help that," said the cat. "We're all mad here. I'm mad. You're mad." "How do you know I'm mad?" said Alice. "You must be," said the cat, "or you wouldn't have come here." Lewis Carroll, Alice in Wonderland. I had even raised my suspicion of a plot to get Branwell into sheltered accommodation and his mother's potential manipulation of this collusion with his social work team. But of course, they are treating me like I'm bitter and twisted. I keep recalling events from a long time ago and was reminded of a car crash I had when I was 18. A man ran into the back of my Mini Cooper just after I joined the main road in Oakengates. Unknown to me, this meant that the other driver was guilty of either driving too fast or without due care and attention. At the same time, I was perfectly prepared to accept that there was no fault and it was just one of those things. However, this driver was friendly with the local police officer, who was called to the scene, and I was bullied relentlessly by them both. Despite my shock, I did not put a foot wrong. Eventually, I received a summons for driving without due care and attention, which, based on a former police officer's friend's disastrous and erroneous advice to my father, I pleaded guilty. I had no idea of the implications. For me, this meant that I was admitting to guilt in the crash, and my father ended up paying for his repairs, whilst I was stuffed with huge insurance bills for many years. Such truths about my life keep coming to me now, truths that I'd never really considered, maybe not even known about at the time, for then I was too emotional. But now I can see everything so clearly. I really don't know why this is happening. Maybe I've got too much time on my hands. But in many respects, I feel like an awakening, like a rehearsal for when I meet Allah and can truly identify what I should be repentant about. Certainly, these could be events which subconsciously affected my view of the world, and with it chipped away at my desire to be good and honest towards my fellow man. For each act of extreme selfishness and abuse of power made me want to gain power, not simply expose its abuse. You see, after suffering from an abuse of power and concluding that revenge is futile, your choice is either to forgive and forget or engage in your own abuse. Until now, I have walked a line between these. All these feelings mask the fear which is at their root, and once we can overcome this fear, then abuse of power is meaningless. We are all powerless. Why abuse it? I keep thinking about the contents of the email from the social worker and eventually realised that in stating that I was surprised that Branwell had been offered sheltered accommodation, I had exposed her failure to communicate with me. Her passive aggression towards me reflected the psychopathic culture which pervades the city, civil and public servants, and with all employees petrified of doing the wrong thing. You see, she spent hours writing a passive-aggressive email to cover her back, when if she had only spent as much time communicating honestly with me, the issue would never have risen. But also in writing like this, she's attempting to shift the blame for their failures with Branwell onto me. Does this explain all my other communications problems? Well, maybe. As when frontline service personnel are not empowered to resolve problems, but petrified of their management, it's a recipe for atrocious service and wasted money or lost customers. But this is mine and Branwell's fate, for we are far too clever to simply to conform to what service providers want us to do, and are seen as internal rebels, when all we want is to explore possibilities and be treated with respect. In all probability, I'm worse at dealing with such situations than Branwell, because at least Branwell is happy to speak about intricate issues to young people in a call centre who call everyone Guy, whereas I prefer to put such things in writing. Eventually I realised that despite Branwell having attempted suicide twice during the watch of this social worker, her sending me aggressive emails, that she was not evil, and in all probability well-intentioned. If there is any evil in what happened, this lies in the management culture of the city's public sector, a management culture which is developed through disrespect for the electorate and service users, seeing them as resources that they can bring, and not as fellow humans. Those responsible for inculcating such attitudes are not evil, but very misguided, for they feel that they know better, and that what they do for the electorate and service users' own good. This is how the Heathcliff Satan tempts us all to behave in a godlike manner, and the higher up we climb in management hierarchies, the more we succumb to this temptation. At which point Blake's Satan appears reminding us what we always knew, but became too engrossed in the game to acknowledge. O Satan, my youngest born, thou art the prince of starry hosts, and of the wheels of heaven to turn the mill day and night. William Blake, Milton. Then once again, irony appears as the darkness of the Romantics was cemented during the summer of 1860, or should I say lack of it. As the previous year, the eruption of Gunung Tambora in Sumbawa, now Indonesia, cast the world into darkness and winter. The eruption combined with the Napoleonic Wars resulted in food shortages around the world, culminating in the Peterloo Massacre. Then in the darkness, a hideous creature, a modern Prometheus, arose, who trampled on the golden daffodils of Xanadu as rapidly and unexpectedly as Indonesia's wonderful welcome and liberalism has turned to murderous tribalism. Yet again a throw from Nottingham was behind the scene at the Villa Diodati. Also, despite turning up in Greece to support its independence and giving birth to the computer, I cannot contemplate him as Satan. I again pondered the obvious manipulation that is going on either between me and Branwell's mental health team, or is it Branwell and I and his mental health team? Is his mother behind all that is happening? Certainly with the encouragement of the mental health team, I left Branwell with a home and over $40,000 in savings. Since I have left, he has become homeless, tried to kill himself twice, and I have lost another $30,000. Were the experiences in Indonesia to teach me how to deal with this, even trying to make me more aware of the collusion and manipulation? Of course, I should have raised my concerns about his mother sooner, but after enduring 20 years of abuse, it takes a very long time to come to terms with what has happened and to stop blaming oneself. But I have to say I'm stymied once again, as winning is unimportant, even the $30,000 I've been defrauded out of. All that matters is Branwell and his health. I have wasted $30,000 of my life savings on a son who the state refuses to take account of his wishes, but he's unable to care for himself and too violent and angry to allow others to help him. Little of my money has helped my son in any way, as so much of my money has gone on bank charges and recurring direct debits, especially subscriptions to US-based sites on UFOs and aliens, because governments around the world are conspiring with banks to privatise money. Why? Terrorism? Money laundering? Or is it simply because banks have unbridled greed? Now that truly is evil. But if we trace the actions of government and banks' employees, few could identify them as evil. In fact, most of us would see them as completely normal profit maximisation, bringing the greatest good to the greatest number. How truly seductive evil is. But then there's a further twist. When governments first issued money, it was silver and gold coins. Then money was backed by the gold standard. Since then, debt has increased exponentially. But now debt is electronic and controlled by US financial institutions, largely unbridled of regulation. Yes, we are heading for servitude to faceless corporations without there being any need for it. We cannot say that both Christianity and Islam did not warn us against the dangers of usury. But did any of us realise it would lead to money itself being usury? While banks may be leading our rush to a cashless society, their strategy is slowly sowing the seeds of their own destruction. For what is a bank without money, without branches, or without customer service? A bank becomes a large data storage provider, and its success is measured by the efficiency of its algorithms. But these are the very same services a bank outsources. So like our intelligence services, the world's future is in the hands of a few data storage companies, dislocated from the economic and social consequences of their decisions. You may see this as efficiency or scientific logic, but the very assumptions these companies have made have the ability to wreak havoc, even destruction, on humanity. I resolved to make final contact with Branwell's team, letting them know that I'd worked out their treachery and offering an olive branch so that once we could work together in Branwell's best interests. I didn't anticipate a response, nor did I get one. Nor did I wish to sue his team to recover my $30,000, given the problems I've had in dealing with the UK from Indonesia. But it also served the purpose. For if this part of my story ever becomes public, it can be shown that they rejected the opportunity to be truthful, but prepared to continue behaving godlike. Later I heard from Branwell that they are now refusing to communicate with me because I was abusive, which of course I wasn't, just honest. In fact, claims of customer abuse is an old chestnut when customers expose manipulation and shoddy practice. But to tell a schizophrenic son that his father, about his father, is surely malpractice. Since my somewhat abortive trip to Kota Gede, I've been having a feeling that paranormal activity was increasing once again, despite having largely rejected it. After the infection on my foot in Bali, I started to develop arthritis in the ankle to my other foot, which is just how the possession first affected me, now some 2 years ago. Parcano had reassured me it wasn't connected to Kota Gede. So was it Om Uni active once more? despite me believing that I'd gained some protection from poor Omankunagaran. But then, one Juma Tliwan, Budde and Maddie once again complained of warmth on their backs, and Budde developed an infection in her vagina. I placed my hand on Maddie's back and was told that this was sent by Omuni. Indeed, a few days previously, I'd received warnings once more and was told that there was nothing and we would overcome it. We had recently had a full mirror made so that Maddie could try on outfits. During these experiences, on 2 separate nights, the mirror cracked, only at the corners, but it nevertheless cracked. It later cracked completely, but somehow it felt like emancipation rather than ill fortune. Then, only 2 days later, the warmth on the ladies' backs had gone and my ankle subdued with ibuprofen, although Budde's infection was a little more determined. It seems to me that maybe the continued suffering from Omuni's gains is necessary for us to find a solution, for when we are no longer troubled by them, they no longer exist. Of course, I'm not allowed to rejoice at the image of Omuni going mad at the ineffectiveness of his mischief, as Maddie predicted nearly 1 year ago, but I do believe this to be an inevitable trajectory. The next day was the Javanese Day of Pon, and I set off as usual to walk down to the mountain Pasar. I was just over halfway when I realised I needed a poo. Now, having experienced this previously more than a year ago in Shrewsbury and Jogja, I was taking no chances and called Maspura to bring me home on his motorbike. Actually, I'd just passed the masjid and there was another on the way to the Pasar, but somehow I wanted to return to my western toilet. When this first happened in Shrewsbury, I believed that it may have been sent by piety. Later, I believed it was malevolence leaving my body. Much later, I refined this view that it was malevolence leaving, but as a result of stomach problems caused by lead poisoning. Certainly, lead being released from the teeth and bones would explain my arthritis, maybe even Budde and Maddie's heat. Or was this simply coincidence? Now this is how I must lead my life, never really knowing what is behind minor occurrences that would once have thought nothing of or written off as coincidence. But I was thrust outside the cave, not exactly protesting, but then nor did I ask to leave. And having wandered outside the cave, I can never simply go back to the simple explanations, albeit that simple explanations are exactly what I must seek to rid myself of the power of Omuni exerts over my mind. Whether these explanations are based on Western science or another alternative, anything as long as it's not black magic. When the next day I was again afflicted, far from confirming mischief, I realised that once again lead was being released from my bones and teeth, hence the arthritis. I also remember the minor headaches that I've been having, nothing compared to the fog of a year ago, but headaches nevertheless. Fortunately, I feel much healthier than when this happened previously. Again, it coincides with a change in the weather, but on this occasion, a move into the rainy season. Whatever was happening was certainly playing on our minds. Maddie started to have nightmares. I was going to write as she started some 2 years ago, but maybe they're no worse than they always have been. It's just something she had not done when lobotomized with South Korean medication. Whilst I arose at 3 o'clock to see our bathroom door move, then heard water flowing into the basin, but nobody was there. But I could also hear singing coming from up the mountain. Locals believe this is the daily wedding celebration of Nero Rorokido's son, daily because his brides die from being unable to accommodate his penis, which is the size of a coconut palm. We were going back to Jakarta in a week. Was this simply a reflection of my subconscious trepidation? Things took an unexpected turn on the Tuesday morning. Bude spotted the Duke and brother-in-law praying outside his house, pointing and spitting in our direction at 2 in the morning. So is he really behind our minor irritations after all? Just as this episode began with us suspecting him of mischief, so in the end is his underlying betrayal. But I became preoccupied with more important issues, not least Branwell. Maddie is not in the slightest bit concerned, as she knows that his powers are so very limited. But I speculate that if it is his underlying mischief which has made us susceptible to the maliciousness of others. Certainly our problem started after he visited us for our wedding, and then following staying with him to oversee the building of our home. So the third man was my brother-in-law after all. We are visiting Bacarno on Thursday prior to going to Jakarta on Saturday, so any residual problems will be resolved. But is this how we are to lead our lives? Always concerned about the mischief of our neighbours wherever we stay? In all probability, yes it is. And once again, I have learnt of the dreadful destructive force jealousy is, especially within families. Tuesday coincided with Pon, so I set off as usual for the Pasar. Then, as increasingly usual, around halfway I needed a poo, so I started to walk home. I arrived home safely, but immediately went for a very large poo. Maybe not unusual. It was the morning, and walking probably stimulated my bowels, except that I'd had a very large poo prior to setting off. I really must ask Parcano if this is the Santet spell, or I'm simply removing malevolence. I am now experiencing conjunctivitis, which I have concluded, along with my arthritis, headache and poos, is indicative of lead being released from my bones. Some months after this, I had my first bout of Devon colic. As a young man, I had suffered colic twice, and this time I knew exactly what it was. Despite being incredibly painful, it passed away quickly, without a visit to Bath. In fact, the colic went without me emptying my bowels, albeit with some discomfort. I wonder if the knowledge of the Fortean creates the stress which releases this lead from my bones, creating the vicious cycle which nearly consumed me. I also recall having feelings of paranormal activity after returning from Kotagedi, but I'd also been to Pasar Beringharju that day and bought numerous jimat and incenses. The Duke and brother had even seen me with them and asked me what they were. Is this how he was able to penetrate our defences once more? Everything is well wrapped in plastic, so will no longer attract his malevolence, but I must be more careful in the future. Now things are becoming complicated again, just when I thought I had everything worked out in my mind, and just as they always do when I believe I've reached a conclusion. Just as in quantum physics, it's important to hold on to contradictory views. Richard Ferryman. Such as my search for truth between thesis and antithesis, when both are true or false, depending on your perception. No sooner had I this thought, and remembered that prior to these feelings, a tooth had chipped, undoubtedly resulting in lead into my bloodstream once more. But that doesn't explain Bude and Made's feelings. Maybe the underlying lesson of my life is to come to terms with jealousy, perhaps even to find ways to reduce it in others. I've mentioned a village in which I grew up and that my father was a grocer. At a very young age, I was aware of the incredible jealousy that the village had for my father. My dad always blamed the socialist vicar, but I think such feelings tapped into a traditional rural nihilism, not unlike Luddism. Not that I am passing any value judgments. I'm simply trying to come to terms with events that have shaped my life, most of which have probably gone unnoticed. Indeed, my own mother somewhat shared this rural nihilism and revulsion over my father's left-brain dominance. I remember my mother telling me how since getting married, my father had taken her to the polling booths each election to vote Conservative. But she'd always voted Labour, never disclosing this to our habitual grocer. As I walked to the post office one morning, past the chicken factories, I pondered once more on how our desa was a microcosm of wider society. Allah had provided us with plenty, and despite the poor soils, it is possible to feed a family from a small plot of land, even to share with neighbours during the hot season, when little grows. But the opportunities to grow cash crops, and therefore to earn money, are very limited. Traditionally, there was no need for money, and people made their homes with bamboo and bamboo matting. But the moment they started to use concrete blocks and manufactured building materials, they needed money, and therefore bank loans. But in our desa, in order to pay off the bank loans, there is a need for some income, which the manufacture of bamboo instruments just about provided. My analogy is slightly inaccurate here, as in most countries, the impetus to create money and to continue issue it is to collect taxes, and from this grew credit and the money supply. But then a few in our desa saw the opportunity to make more money, albeit at the inconvenience of the community, and in doing so, the community turned on them. Initially annoyance, but this turned to envy and finally hatred. These individuals, who, as my father put it, had bettered themselves, knowing their ostracism, consoled themselves in consumer goods, especially air conditioners and a car, which only added to the animosity. These same individuals became strong supporters of Protestant Islam, supplanting the authority of Kajawan and the Dukan. Then, when their control over religion was not enough, they sought public office to bring the power of the state to protect their newly acquired wealth, to destroy the community further, and to enforce their hegemony. But nobody sheds a tear for the demise of the Gnostics and my Dukan brother, the village idiot, believing this was modern and what Allah wants. But even the devout in my desa attend prayers at the same time, rather than officially following the sun, and there are others who rarely attend the masjid nor fast at Ramadan. Officially, such people don't exist in Indonesia, but like their counterparts in the city, they now have money as their god. Yes, people now have bathrooms and fridges, but they're consumed by envy and greed, and have removed themselves further from what God wants of us, creating misery. I'm beginning to understand that some of this jealousy towards me is from people who want me all to themselves. My mother, my son, and maybe even my Dukan brother-in-law. Certainly he feels like this about Made. We all seek love because we feel dislocated from God's love. But in our materialist world, love is a commodity to be bought and sold, and in particular something seek to own, whilst God's love is unconditional and universal. Real love means loving all that God created and not seeking to own or dominate anything he created. So is my mission to learn how to direct these feelings in others? Again, I am reminded of how I have criticised world leaders, when surely they must balance the feelings and jealousy of millions. So my lesson and solution is put into perspective. Once again, Branwell heaped his problems on me, making me doubt that he was truly going to sort himself out and putting some urgency on my solution. This episode ends as it begins, with Buddha planting fears in our minds about the Dukan brother. Is there a lesson to be learned here? 3 weeks later, the Duke and brother was admitted to hospital with a hernia. When we visited Parcano, he was dismissive of the brother's powers, explaining that our house was safe and that we should not worry. In all probability, one of us picked up a wayward spirit whilst we went out, and it was nothing to be concerned about. Maddie now remembers almost everything that happened to her, and given that we're going to Jakarta on Saturday, she, for the first time, shared everything with Parcano. Parcano confirmed that the water which Uni spreads each morning and the dead Barong Shamani did indeed show that Uni was attempting to harm us. However, he reassured us that we were protected by him and no harm could come to us. But when she saw the water being spread, that she would place salt on it, and as a precaution we should spread salt around the house. Parcano also gave us a small pack of salt mixed with flowers, which we're to throw into our yard from the outside when we arrive, and this will help us to sell the house. But Medley tells me that Widati, with a degree in interactive media, does not know how to use an online estate agent site. Parcano also explained that each Dukan we visited had put another spirit in Maddie. That was why she was possessed by so many spirits, and that we really shouldn't use more than one helper. I think he was suggesting that in order to help a Dukan worked via a benign spirit to remove the malevolent. Although I know he was suggesting that most of the Dukan we had used had been attempting to harm rather than help us. Just as Buddy's superstitions come into the fore once more, so did the superstitions of a secret between Mas Pradipta and Paerte, maybe even Uni. During all our talk of Uni's treachery at Parcano's, Mas Pradipta shifted uneasily, avoiding eye contact. Whilst it's better not to contemplate what the links between these men is, we need to remain observant. Well, that concludes this chapter from my book, The Londo and the Green Queen's Revenge, which is my third book in the series. I do hope you've enjoyed it. I'm hoping to add further chapters about every week, and so far I've managed to do this. If you'd like to hear more from me, then please subscribe and hit the bell. That way you get notifications of when a new chapter is released. In addition, I don't seem to be working very well with these algorithms on YouTube, and my videos really aren't being promoted as they should. So if you could also hit the like button and sort of make some comments, I think that will help me to get noticed. I hate to ask you that, but I really do need more viewers. But thank you for this viewing. Thank you so much.